Welcome to another Consults Over Coffee. Dr. Michael Jones, and I'm joined today by Dr. Nina Kraus. She's the director of the Auditory Neuroscience Laboratory at Northwestern University in Chicago, Illinois. And she's here to discuss the world of sound that surrounds us, how we process that sound, and the benefits of music on improving learning, language, and aging. I think you're really going to enjoy this. Welcome to another Consults Over Coffee. I'm Dr. Michael Jones, and I am joined today by an old friend of mine from, God, it's been 10 years probably, if not longer, Nina Kraus, who is the U. Knowles Professor of Neurosciences, Neurobiology at Northwestern University, my old stomping grounds as well. And you have created an incredible body of work in basically the neuro would it be fair to say the neural processing of sound?
Absolutely. Sound in the brain.
So I'm going to start with a real wide open question for which there probably is no one right answer, but let's start with the idea, is music language?
So
in,
I'm going
in,
to tell you,
in 45 words or less.
yeah. My students are always complaining that I don't, I don't give them a one-word answer or the answer because usually um, the answer is it depends. And with respect to language, it depends on how you define language. And so if you think of language as a system by which we communicate with each other, um, then we can think of music as a language, a kind of language. It is a language that operates. I mean, what makes music unique is that it really operates through sound. So it's not, sign language is a language, but you don't need the sound. But music, you you must have the sound, but you also have a lot of movement and visual information and um, many other ingredients. But I would say, if you want to pin me down, I would say music is a kind of it is a language.
We had talked a little bit about this because I agree, frankly. I mean, I think of playing music as a way of communicating feeling or imparting feeling or emotion, um, and more than it's not how I expect to find out how the Dow Jones is doing today, but it communicates in powerful ways. And you had mentioned, as we were talking before, the the importance of sound in our lives and how really that's sort of been downplayed in our society in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And yeah, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Well,
That really kind of
absolutely.
gets to the crux of what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. I think that sound is under recognized. Sound is invisible, like many powerful forces in our life, like gravity. And so you don't see it. It's not in your face, and yet it is fundamental to who we are, how we evolved. Sound is you know organisms have had to listen to the world and to be able to distinguish um, their survival
Right.
based on, is this sound, is this something that's going to eat me, or can I eat it, can I mate with it? And sound is tremendously important and has a deep evolutionary history. And yet I think that also the world has become noisier, we're losing the ability to listen, and we're losing, um, we're not paying attention to sound as as well, we really should be. I think what we're losing something very, very deep, that is very much a part of us and our humanity.
Well, and that that does kind of lead to something. I know you have done work with respect to the influence of music and aging and cognitive function with
Yeah.
time. And as a 61-year-old musician who notices that my ability to discriminate sounds when there's a lot of background noise has diminished over time. I have to work harder to do that now than I used to do.
Yeah.
I mean, what are the effects? I mean, obviously hearing loss over time, but is that is it to some extent reversible? Is it preventable?
First of all, don't think of it so much as hearing loss, because I'll bet if I measured your hearing thresholds, they'd be pretty good. It's really, think about, I mean, hearing happens in our brain. Yes, yes, you need a healthy ear. And yes, as we get older, we can lose some hearing in our ears. But if you take a person, an older person who, has an age appropriate hearing, and one person has had has musical experience either in their past or they're continuing to make music. When I think of a musician, I'm really talking about someone who regularly plays a musical instrument, like a couple times a week for an hour or two.
So not
You
necessarily
know,
a
oh
professional.
no, 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 you don't need to identify as a professional musician at all. You can be a hack musician like me. I play a number of instruments, not especially well, and I play regularly. Every day, even if it's just for 5 minutes. Um, but what happens is that if you compare a musician defined that way with a non-musician, and you measure their ability to hear speech and noise, even though their ears are identical, the musician will be able to make out the speech in noise much, much better. Their memory for sound will be much better. And if you measure the brain's response to sound, which is something that I do in my lab, which we call Brainvolts, we just, as I'm talking to you now, the neurons in your brain that respond to sound are producing electricity. And we can put sensors on your head and measure that electricity and see how good a job your brain is doing at processing sounds. And what I can see is that if you take a musician and a non-musician and you, say, play some speech to them, and it's a nice, easy listening uh, condition where it's not very quiet, the non-musician and the musician's response to sound, their brain waves to sound, look very similar. But now, if you make the listening conditions more challenging, so now you're in a restaurant or you're in a car or you're walking down the street and there's traffic, and you measure the brain's response to sound, what you see is that the brain's response to sound for the musician is almost as good in this noisy, challenging listening environment as it was in quiet. Whereas the non-musician has really taken a hit. And you can see that there's very impoverished processing. And really with aging, one of the things that we know with aging research is that the variability between one person and another is enormous. So,
Right.
there are some older people who, perform really differently from their age cohort on all kinds of things, because they have a whole life that they've lived that has influenced who they've become, which is a combination of their genetics and the choices they have made throughout their lives for how to live their lives. And I like to think that healthy aging begins in childhood.
So let me ask you this. For the person that was not musical for most of their life, who now it is, are the benefits of playing music on auditory function, discrimination, um, are those, can you get those even if you start later in life? Is there benefit to doing that later in life?
Absolutely. And again, we know this so clearly from, I mean, you can see it in a very controlled way in animal experiments where, you can see that the hearing brain continues to change, continues to learn until we die.
That's, I mean, I think that's a good point, because I think there is sort of this concept that, like, over time neural plasticity diminishes.
It doesn't diminish. It's different. We learn differently when we're 5 years old than when we're 50 years old.
Yeah.
And um, and there are a lot of strengths that we learn, based on the way we've lived our lives and the way we have sculpted our brain, very much based on our experience, that gives us a lot of detailed insight into our learning as an older person. And you have a different brain, but the fact is that all the way throughout your life, always, 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 in utero until from womb to tomb, the hearing brain continues to learn.
Is there uh, is there evidence, or is there literature that addresses the impact of music on cognitive decline?
Yeah. Um, and so there's an interesting literature on that, and also on um, um, another sound-based activity, which is speaking another language. So if you're bilingual, if you speak another language, there have been some really wonderful studies showing that the onset of dementia in a population is later, if it's going to occur at all, and with music as well. So strengthening your hearing brain. Um, okay, the hearing brain is vast, and it engages how we think, how we feel, how we move, and how we interact with our other senses. So hearing very much engages our thinking skills, our memory skills. And one of the things that we know is that if we lose our hearing, we actually lose our thinking skills. People, this is actually a really important reason to get a hearing aid if you need one, because you can get away with sort of going on and living your life without this hearing aid. But the fact is that once you can hear the world well, um, you you think better, and you engage with people, so you don't have this social isolation that then, you have emotional problems and loneliness, and I mean, this all snowballs. But the fact is, being a musician really strengthens, for example, your auditory working memory. So right now, you and anybody who's listening, um, the only way that you can make sense of what you're listening to is if you remember what I just said, right? And so your auditory working memory is really your ability to work. You're not just repeating back what I said, you're actually thinking about what I said, and this is your auditory working memory. It's a really important task, and it is a task that is very much strengthened by making music.
So let's go to the other end of the life curve. Let's let's go to kids. And because I know you've done a lot of work on music and education, right?
Yep.
I mean, what's the impact there?
Well, um, so a number of founders of music programs came to me, and actually, as I've talked to educators and teachers over the years, they've all said, you know, we all know that the kids who play music are the better students. What's going on in their brains? And so there was the Harmony Project in Los Angeles, which is in the gang reduction zones of LA and Chicago Public Schools. We have done multi-year projects. So in other words, taken the same high school kid in ninth grade and followed him for 4 years as he went through either music education or some kind of fitness-based activity, and looked at how their brains changed over that period of time. The work out in LA was on elementary school kids, so second, third, and fourth graders. And what we were able to see is that the kids who played music had auditory skills that were strengthened, that led to, well, this is your first question on language, because it turns out that learning language, not only speaking, but learning to read, is very much based on sound. You have to be able to connect the sounds of letters to their symbols and rhythm. You know, I mean, you think of, well, rhythm is an important component of music. Everybody knows that.
Right.
But not everybody knows, unless you listen to Martin Luther King, or you just kind of listen to anybody who's speaking, and you realize that there is a music of speech. And there, you know, you
Absolutely.
stop and start, and you have these durations that are long and short, and they completely influence how it is that you communicate through language. So it turns out that the kids who played music were excelled over the other kids in their language skills and their memory skills, and in the part of the system that they just cannot game, which is their brain's response to sound. So we know that making music strengthens the processing of certain sound ingredients. And it's especially the harmonics, the timbre of sound, that is as important in music as it is for distinguishing a G from a B. So, you know, we could just objectively measure kids' responses to sound that were identical at the beginning of the study. And then we measured them over time, the same kids over 4 or 5 years, and we were able to determine that all of these things changed for the better in the kids who played music, which I think can explain um, that, you know, why these kids are doing better in school, because they're learning better communication skills, and they're also in touch with you know, with their humanity, in terms of you know, everyone should know how to make some music, because it feels so good, and it's part of of who we are. It's part of our memories. It's the last thing to go when we, you know,
So I
die.
wasn't I wasn't going to ask this, but it's a great question, and I think it's right up your alley, which is, why does it feel good? It
Well,
activates a lot of cool spots in your brain.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, can you?
Well, I mean, we really do know there's been some beautiful biochemical work showing that certain um, parts of the nervous system and certain neurotransmitters are are activated and are produced when you are playing music, or listening to a piece of music that you have played, that you know. And again, this is, you think, oh well, this is just going to involve the limbic system, the emotion system of the brain. No, it involves the auditory systems, the visual system. I mean, making music really engages so much. Well, you know, sound engages so much of our nervous system, of our brain, um, and music really does that incredibly well. And I want to tell you just my own personal feel good story. In the morning when I wake up, it's not my best time. Like when we'd be riding, it would kind of take me an hour or two to warm up, to even
Yeah.
smile a little bit, right? Grouchy. But I've learned that if I make myself just sit down at the piano and play, even for 5 minutes every day. And, I started doing this a couple of years ago. And, before I would get on my bike at that point to go to work, God would be in his heaven and all would be right in the world, from, having woken up kind of discouraged. And suddenly, you just make these notes, you make these sounds, and it feels so good.
It's powerful medicine. It's very powerful medicine. Absolutely. The which I think, is sort of those effects, the benefits of music, how durable are they? Like if someone
Yeah.
has done this for a couple of years and then they stop.
Durable. So, for example, when I get to talk to people in a crowd, I'll ask the group, how many of you have played a musical instrument sometime in your life? And almost everybody is raising their hands. And how many of you are still playing an instrument now? And not as many. But we've actually looked at this in terms of the brain's response to sound. And we have found that even if you have made music for a couple of years in your past, say in high school you've played an instrument for a couple of years and then stopped. Well, when we look at older adults 40 years later who haven't played music in between, the people who have made music earlier in their lives, and they've learned how to make these sound to meaning connections. They've learned how to connect sound with memory, sound with what to pay attention to, what to ignore. And so once they have learned it's a really wonderful investment for the future. This pays dividends. That even if you don't continue to play, if you continue to play, you're doing even better. But even if you just, which is such a good reason for, one of the many reasons why music should be an integral part of every child's education.
With the loss of physical education and recess and the arts in schools, I think it's just a huge, to some extent, I think part of our societal problems today go back to that type of thing. I think you build a better human.
Absolutely. Let me tell you about my Uncle Hans. So many years ago, like in the 50s, 60s, he was a physician, physiatrist, and he did some studies showing that American school age kids were less physically fit than their European counterparts. And at that time, he was working with Eisenhower and then Kennedy with the Council of Physical Fitness,
Right.
and also the Wise Way to a Healthy Back eventually. I mean, he was involved in a lot of these programs, but very much his view was that every child should be physically fit, not just the kids who are the stars who go to become varsity players. And I think there's been very much the same kind of attitude with music, or even parents will think, well, why should why should my kid play the flute? He's not going to, he's not going to be a flutist or a violinist, or he's not going to be a musician. And yet this is such an important uh, health benefit to be physically fit, to be strong, and to be flexible your whole life, and to be able to have this language of music, to be able to communicate with people who are really different from you in lots of ways, even may not even speak your language, and yet, we can sing together, we can move together, we can we get so much benefit from what music teaches us cognitively and emotionally that it's just a very important part of human development that we have just let go by the wayside, because of the emphasis on the stars, the five
Right.
people. I mean, one of my kids was on the swimming team, and and he's probably certainly the best swimmer I know, and yet he was one of the weakest play swimmers on the team at Evanston High School, and really, for the most part, everyone just paid attention to the five kids who were the stars, and nobody really cares too much about even the kids who are on the varsity teams who aren't the stars, and that's just nuts.
It is kind of nuts. It is kind of nuts. And it was funny, when I was getting ready to retire, people kept asking me all the time, well, what will you do? What will you do? What will you do? And the question is not what will I do? The question is who will I be?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and that gets back to the same thing. And I always, I'm sure I'm going to destroy this quote, but there was an old Vonnegut quote about, make some kind of art every day, whether it's writing a poem, whether it's singing in the shower, whether it's dancing while you're vacuuming your house. You will have made something,
yeah,
and your soul will be better for that. And you can do that. I mean, I used to see that all the time. We'd go to the VA medical center here, and they would have, because they have a lot of like chronic inpatients, and we would have these music therapy sessions, and they would, open mic or kind of jam sessions, and but you take a group of people of incredibly diverse backgrounds and capabilities, and I can tell you within 10 minutes there's a rhythm
yeah,
that group of people is now entrained as one group, and they have walked in as different people but walks out as a group.
yeah, yeah,
And that's, so there clearly are the obvious neurologic benefits of music both throughout our lives, as you have just so elegantly demonstrated throughout your career, but there are also the societal benefits and the personal benefits.
yeah, huge. I mean, even with COVID, one of the first things that happened, and it started in Italy, where people would lean out their windows and sing together.
Oh yeah,
And then it's a way of music brings us together even at times when we're pulled apart.
it does. So we are about almost out of time. I could talk about this for days.
Yeah, me too. I love this stuff. I am so lucky to get to do something that I love to do.
Well, and you've done it so well. I just, I think as we get older, you start to appreciate the body of work that people produce. That it's, when you're young, you want to be the one hit wonder. You want to, top of the charts, blah blah, and then as you look at, you kind of go, no, what have you done over time, and have you built this story, and you have, and you continue to do that, and that's it's incredible, and we've just scratched the surface here with what you guys have done. If people are interested in learning more about what you do, how do they find you?
Uh, what they need to do is just go to our magical website, which is put together for you. And our lab is called Brainvolts. So it's www.brainvolts.northwestern.edu.
No, well, it's just amazing stuff, and thank you so much for taking the time to do this, and it's been so nice to reconnect with you and Marshall, and
Likewise.
made
Likewise.
made my week. So
Yeah.
that's another consults over coffee for the week. and
All
we'll
right.
be back next week.